Hello, everybody. Good morning and good evening, and welcome to Zinnov's virtual roundtable discussion on measuring productivity in software teams. A quick introduction. So I'm Sangeeta Anand from Zinnov. I'm a principal. I'm based out of Dallas, Texas, and I primarily work on the engineering excellence practice in Zinnov. We also have a very exciting list of panelists today who are waiting to share their experience and wisdom on measuring productivity in software teams.
Right. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. I'm Srini Basava. I head up the India Center, and also I'm the head of engineering for consumer experience at Bazaar Voice. I'm based out of Bangalore.
Hey, good morning and good evening wherever you are. My name is Balchandra Namzoshi. I'm the managing director and head of India operations for MindBody. I'm based out of Pune, and thanks Zinnov for this opportunity to talk to all of you. Uh, Engineering productivity is, I think, very close to my heart, and I'm sure all of you are interested to listen more.
Sorry,
Hello,
Deepak.
everyone. I'm Deepak Vishweswaraya. I'm the Vice President of Platform Engineering for Pegasystems. Been with the company for a few months now, about 8 months. Prior to this, I was Senior VP and Managing Director at NetApp, based out of Bangalore. Great panel to have. Love to chat with some of my colleagues here, about the topic today. So look forward to it.
Hi, everyone. This is Srinivas Sampath, simply called as Srini. But for the purpose of this call, I'll be called Srini S because there's another Srini on this call as well. So we were deciding how we should kind of call each other. So I'm based in Bangalore and working for a company called Koros. And I joined Koros a couple of years back. And it's been a pretty exciting journey till now as Koros focuses on the social space. And it's a very interesting and growing space as of now. Coming to the topic, I think it's a pretty interesting topic and can't wait to share our thoughts and, of course, hear the questions from the attendees too.
Thank you, panelists, for your introduction. Just to set the context, right? So we all know that software development is an empirical process, and there are very many uncertainties in this whole development process. But if we don't measure what we are doing, it's very hard to improve, right? So how do we improve the outcomes if we don't measure what we are doing? And the correct selection of indicators, which are measurable and quantifiable, are very key in this whole aspect of it, and they will help us focus on the areas of opportunity, and they will bring about significant improvements. And and it won't be a very random thing that done without a precise outcome defined. And that's the fact. But there's also a myth behind it, where Drucker, who many of us like to quote in many of our talks, said that what gets measured gets managed. But that is incorrectly interpreted in many cases, and sometimes we forget and we tend to ignore some of the intangible things, like what about the value delivered to our customers? What about the happiness index for our customers and for the team? What about the team morals? How do all of these factors, which directly translate into productivity of the software team, how are they measured as well? And just because they cannot be measured or managed, it doesn't mean that we need to drop them, but they are also very important. So having this context of what needs to be measured to improve and what needs to be managed, and that sets the context for this meeting. So without further ado, we'll get right into the discussion. And to start off today, our first question, Srini B, will you take the first question? What is the importance of productivity for software teams, and what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think, Sangeeta, thank you for that introduction. Actually, a little bit of that I want to elaborate and then probably try and, reflect on your question. We definitely live in a very, very complex world, and on top of it, software development itself is quite complex. The customers are diverse. They are spread all over the globe. Their needs are unique, and they're ever changing. On top of it, our teams are diverse, spread all over the world, spread across cultures, technical maturity, composition, tech stacks, etc. The enablers, like infrastructure, the technology is also changing and also evolving. And on top of all of that, we have COVID now. That is actually disrupting the way we worked. We thought we figured out how to work, and everything is getting disrupted. So, looking at all of this, right, in this kind of a VUCA world that we live in, software development teams are expected to kind of develop extremely deep customer empathy and then translate that into impactful outcomes, like you said, impactful outcomes to our customers, and those should delight them. And that's what's the challenge in this whole thing, right? So it is very, very important that we have to figure out what we need to measure. Otherwise, we will never understand, how effective are we at delivering value for our customers, and our customers, are they actually getting, delighted by what we are delivering, or are they just throwing it away? And key thing, and you also alluded to in your intro, is that every organization is at a different state. Every organization is unique. Every product they are building is unique. And it is very important to understand that everybody could be at a different state. And we need to figure out what are those 1 or 2 critical goals that we need to focus on, establish the measures necessary, and focus on continuous improvement to move those measures slowly and forward. And that's primarily, the main thing that I wanted to talk about. Now, kind of getting into the question that you asked me, the focus within any organization, depending on who you talk to, their focus will be slightly different. If you're talking to an executive in any organization, they are really interested in, hey, are we delivering the value? Are we working on the right kind of items, the right priority items? Is the team focusing on the right things at any given day, because they are always dealing with 10 different things? And are we efficiently delivering value for our customers? Of course, when you think from that perspective, the metrics that our executives would be interested in are, hey, what percentage of our capacity is going towards new product development that is delivering value for our customers, versus, run the business activities or keep the lights on kind of activities. Another one is, hey, every epic or every story or every major requirement that you're working on, how long does it take from ideation to actually putting it in production? Basically, time to value. And then the third thing is about, basically looking at predictability as well, right? What are we committing, quarter over quarter, and are we actually able to deliver what we committed? So basically the say-do ratio and predictability, etc. Now, kind of going into the mid-level management, what are they interested in? They're focused on, hey, are we doing the right work in the right location? Because everybody is all over the world. Or the teams in those locations, ideally, is the composition right? Are they stable? Are we hiring right? Are we onboarding right? And are we delivering on time, right? And in those cases, the metrics tend to be more around, hey, from the minute we get a resume, how long does it take for us to make a hiring decision? Do we do it in 1 week, or do we do it in 1 month? From a new hire joined, from the date of joining to when does that person actually start doing something productive? Is it taking us 2 weeks to do that, or is it taking us 2 months to do that? And then predictability, I already mentioned earlier, is key in this whole thing. And now the last, stakeholder, there are many, but I'm focusing on a select few that I feel are important, are the team members themselves. And here the standard metrics come into play: the software development lifecycle best practices, the team's ability to manage change, basically how agile are the teams, and the metrics associated with them are, hey, velocity, how manual work that they do versus how much of their work is automated. Do they have CI/CD kind of deployments? In place? Do they do, and more importantly, do they have the culture of continuous improvement? Are they looking at what they're doing, and then are they trying to get better, sprint over sprint, etc.? So in summary, basically, with so many different things, and this is just a subset, by the way, the leaders, the panel members will talk about 15 more things, I'm sure, right? Because this is a vast subject, and it is important for every organization to identify the critical few 2 or 3 focus areas, establish those metrics. Like you pointed out, if you establish a metric, people will focus on those. And yes, if you set the wrong metrics, obviously you'll focus on the wrong thing. So you need to be very careful about what those metrics are and the focus areas are, and then build that culture of actually improving them. And that's basically, over time, when you start doing that, this will start impacting the Uber metrics that our executives are interested in. And that's how we can continue to make progress. So that's why measuring, establishing metrics, benchmarks, metrics, working on continuously improving them is very important. Hope that helped.
Yep. Thanks, Srini. Thank you for setting that context very well and tying back to the current times that we are living in. Bal, what is your perspective on this? What is the importance of measuring productivity?
Yeah. So thanks, Srini, for setting the tone. And I think you kind of covered the entire gamut of productivity in different levels of organization as well as in different contexts. I just wanted to point out more on my own journey, or how did I get into understanding more about engineering productivity and teams. And probably I think some of you would be able to relate to that. So when I started a few years back, I was given a team to start from scratch. I was like the manager, and I was asked to hire a team and then start delivering. And initially it started off with 5 members, 10 members team with development, QA, and others. And I was things were going pretty smooth, and we were able to make progress. Soon, in few months down the line, we had like 30, 40, 50 team members. As we started scaling, I started feeling a little bit disconnected from what's really happening, because as the numbers start growing and we were scaling, the whole thing actually changed its the dynamics, because now every day you would have so many people working on their code, so many things happening. It started becoming very difficult to understand what is really happening on ground. Are there people in the team who are really stuck, versus are there people who are making progress pretty rapidly? And then how can I go and help those who are actually stuck? Basically, how do I even find out who are really stuck and who are making progress? As you grow teams, you have like now multiple teams. You want to see that how good progress they are making. What is the benchmark you want to set? And I had no clue, because there was no benchmark. How do I say that these teams are really making progress or not? And then more importantly, as I started having conversations with the engineers, it was getting difficult to talk in the objective fashion, right? All the comments or the feedback started becoming more subjective based on what I was seeing, but I really didn't had anything to base my observations on. And that's how I got really started into started measuring engineering productivity and different metrics and so on. Over a period, yeah, I have burnt my hands and tried multiple different matrices and so on, and I hope to share some of them here, so that you learn from what we have done. Obviously, there is no one solution which will fit everyone, so probably you can take the learnings with a pinch of salt, but I hope that that would be useful in more subsequent discussions.
Yeah, thank you, Bal. I mean, it really helps to understand, somebody who has gone through the pains of this process and what your benefits that you're seeing. So that's very helpful context. Srini, what is your take on this?
Yeah, thanks, Sangeeta. And Srini, thanks for setting that context. I think it really gave a lot of a primer, right, to why we feel this is important. And productivity and measurement of productivity has been an age-old question, right? I think right in the early software days, it's always been a question on how do we measure, what's the importance, and what does it do to teams and things like that. So it's good that we're talking about it. But if you take a step back and look at what productivity actually is in its most simplest definition, right? It's all about how efficient something is, right? And when we consider it in the aspect of the software development team, it's all about how efficient a team or an individual is, right, in doing something. And what we really want to gain by measuring that is how does it become a force multiplier, right? By being more productive, how can it effectively multiply what the team can do, right? Now, understanding this is important because every team, if you look at the composition of software teams, it is made up of a mix of individuals with varying capabilities, experience, and whatnot. And if a team needs to execute in a rhythm, right, a good understanding of productivity is extremely important, right? Secondly, I feel having a view of productivity in teams is important because one, it helps the team forecast its work and effectively plan what they can, deliver. And this in turn helps the overall organization. I mean, kind of alluding to what Srini said about these Uber metrics, right? It kind of helps them understand, or the organization understand, what can be done in a given period of time, and thereby make sure that they commit the right things out into the field, right? Because we don't want to be in a situation where there is a disconnect between what's being committed and teams having to scramble to do it, and it gets all blamed on productivity, right? And the last thing is by having a pretty good view on productivity, one can also understand who in the team actually needs help, right? Because we talked about teams being made of different individuals, right? And not everybody would be in the same level of productivity. So one of the key indications that a manager or a leader can get is who in the team actually needs help, right? And what sort of intervention can be done in such a way that they improve, and that effectively improves the overall productivity of the team, and then it becomes the true multiplier that I talked about.
Yeah, Srini, that's a great point that, you need the productivity metrics for the teams to understand where they need to focus on and how they need to improve. So that's very insightful. Thanks for that. Deepak, over to you for your thoughts.
Thank you. I think the easy thing in terms of going last on the panel is that everybody's already covered everything, right? So I love the force multiplier concept. That you used, Srini, in terms of really bringing out the value of some of the metrics that we could leverage. So from my perspective, to me, productivity for software teams is important if it is actually used in the right perspective. I've so often seen people using productivity metrics for the sake of doing something and not necessarily knowing what are they really doing with it, right? Unless you know what really you want to improve on, it really doesn't help just putting some metrics together. There are a lot of things that it can help. It can help in terms of identifying project bottlenecks early, how you can be more efficient or effective, reduce the risk, eliminate failures, bunch of things that the theory talks about as far as what you can achieve with it. But we also all know very well that the longer it takes to discover a defect or a mistake, the more expensive it is to fix it. Right? We all have experienced. That's why we want to do shift left in terms of any testing that we do. Try and find all the things you do upstream rather than downstream, where it becomes so much more expensive. So to me, that's why it is important. It's also important to calibrate your processes and then establish the right metrics to provide usually the insights that you can get both about not only the business aspect but also the product health and the team performance, right? That you want all of that to be reflected. I think that is one of the things. Srini, we earlier talked about the Uber metrics, right? The Uber metrics, should cover in terms of the business outcome, as well as your, product health, as well as your team productivity or your team performance as such, right? That's kind of how I look at the productivity metrics and then covering it. Just want to state that a study that I recently saw, this was done a little while ago in 2017 by Gartner, where they, interviewed several CIOs in terms of being able to get, how they look at, productivity metrics. About 56% of them said that, 56% of the, metrics really focused on the business outcome. And the other 44% really focused in terms of your ability to deliver. So that can tell you in terms of some of the Uberness that's really talked about earlier, where does the view come from for it? It depends, a little bit on that. So I thought I would share that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Deepak. I completely understand what you're saying, right? Like, you just give a PM saying like, hey, I want to measure metrics, and they can go all crazy and come up with like 100 different metrics that they want to measure. But at the end of it, what really matters is like what delivers value to our customers and what helps the team be able to do that and how efficiently they can do that. So that's a very interesting perspective. And all of you in your brief talks mentioned about like what you have done in your current role and your past roles. So maybe we can talk a little bit more, dive a little bit more deeper into that. Well, we'll like to start with you because you said that you have gone through the pains of discovering, and you have several metrics that you have discovered over time. So, can you give your perspective on that, and what has worked for you, what you have used in the past and current?
Absolutely. So, yeah, I think this whole history of engineering metrics is going back probably as old as software engineering, right? Right from, the initial days, people have been struggling to find out what are the good metrics one can use in order to be effective and measure the team's productivity. There has been debates about whether software is really an art or a science, and probably it's both. But as you started this whole discussion with, what gets measured is what you can improve. So in that spirit, I do believe that, as you start scaling teams, measuring different engineering metrics become very important. Now, of course, there are quantitative metrics and as well as qualitative metrics. You touched upon that initially, that you just don't want to play with the numbers. You also want to understand the whole cultural aspect of it, moral aspect of it on the team, and so on. But just focusing for this part of discussion on the quantitative part of that, there has been various metrics in theory in terms of, what are your input parameters and what are the output parameters, and how do you really control that in order to build a productivity, because productivity at the end of the day is like output divided by input. And I know that some of the companies still probably use even, the hours spent on a task for measuring that, and or even hours spent in office on, whether you're really productive or not. Of course, we are not talking about those companies, but when we start looking at MindBody, as we started growing our center in India, we were looking at what metrics would be really useful for us. And we know that, depending on, your company's current state, overall your engineering philosophy, how fast you want to grow and so on, there will be different metrics which would be useful. So our initial benchmark was that we were going to look at any metrics with the angle of three things. One is the speed or velocity, second is the quality, and third is going to be the complexity. So all these three parameters are important because you don't want to deliver very fast with a very low quality, or you don't want to deliver extremely good quality with near zero bugs, but then hardly you are delivering any value. And at the end of it, I think business outcomes are important. So the complexity is not just in terms of technical complexity, but even the value complexity, how critical value you are delivering to business. And it's important that the metrics which you choose are following this triology, because what happens is any of this equilibrium, if you lose, then you're going to be on a very wrong path and really not able to achieve the desired goal, what your executives or management is looking at. So from our perspective, we did look at various metrics. One of the things which we actively do is we look at the number of active days people are coding in a week. That gives us indication that if somebody is not able to do, whether they are stuck, they are not understanding requirements, maybe a technical problem, some bottleneck, so that we can go and address that. The second metrics to counteract, or to look more on the quality perspective, is the efficiency. So we are looking at how much efficiency we are building, and the efficiency is really looked at is whether you are really changing the same code which you written probably 2 days back, right? So you wrote something last week, this week you are again changing, probably because you didn't give enough thought, design was wrong or anything, or there were bugs. And that is a churn. And the whole point is to reduce that churn and reduce waste. So that's the second thing which we look at. These are more related to code, or code aspect of it. We also are very keen to look at the collaboration aspect of it, because there are teams working in India and across different geographies, how well they are collaborating. And one of the metrics we track is in terms of reviews. So in terms of code reviews, or in terms of checking in a PR, how much really time we are spending in getting that. From a collaboration standpoint, I think there are some good indicators there. The last one which I wanted to talk was essentially because our teams were very new and we were just ramping up the teams. And the typical problem is that, you build a team, they go through your onboarding process, go through some knowledge transfer. Then they start delivering. Maybe they start with some small defects or easy stories. And at one point you say that, okay, now they are started working on the real stories and have started delivering value. However, when you are comparing with teams across geographies, or you have a headquarter in US or wherever, and you want to say that my teams are now as productive as your teams, or maybe at 80% productive as at your teams, we didn't had any real benchmark to talk about. You can always talk qualitatively that yeah, teams are ramped up, they are delivering, but how do you measure that? How do you prove that we are really there? And teams which are not there, how do we help them? So we started looking at this concept of writing 100 lines of productive code, right? And productive code means the code which is really delivering value, something which is not changing too frequently, not have defects, and so on. And how much time does it take? So let's say there is a new developer joining a team in India versus a new developer joining a team in some other geography. How much does a difference between those two people's productivity, and how fast they are able to ramp up and get to a point where they can start contributing? So this has actually helped us in a lot of our conversations with management and different engineering teams across globe, and that has worked very well for us. We obviously also look at some of the qualitative things in terms of metrics, but I'll park that for now. But yeah, from a quantitative perspective, we look at the code related metrics, review related metrics, and then time to productivity.
Yeah, thank you, Bal. I think that was a very key concept that you touched upon, the trilogy of quality versus time to market versus the actual value delivered, and how all three of them have to be balanced. One cannot be done without the other. So thank you for that perspective. Srini B, what is your take on this?
Yeah, when Bal covered some really good sets of metrics, and in fact, just wanted to comment, the number of lines of code, etc., is so controversial. But yes, in certain settings, those are the right metrics, and I've done that and used that for effective conversations. Just wanted to reiterate that, because the minute people hear that, there are a lot of folks who will fight that particular metric with like a religion. So just wanted to comment on that. But I think something else Bal talked about and very much resonated. So I started about a year and a half ago. I was the employee number one for BazaarWise, and we are now whatever 120 people odd, and we are steadily growing. So depending on where we are, the focus, our goal would be slightly different, right? I mean, so initially it was all about hiring. So then our focus was certain hiring goals, and the metrics were related to hiring. And I mentioned a couple, from the minute we receive a resume, irrespective of the channel, referral versus direct, applicant versus agency resume, to how long does it take for us to get to a decision on that particular resume. And we basically religiously made sure it was 2 weeks or under for almost 95% of the resumes that came through. And if not, anyway, the candidate probably will get a good offer if he's any good and he's gone. He or she should be gone. If they're still in the market, then you need to think about, are they really, that top talent or not, number one. And similarly, right, as we got into a little bit of an execution, we got the knowledge and we built our teams, and we started developing a lot of the team specific metrics. We set them up all about the agile metrics, velocities, ensuring we followed the right practices around defining our epics right. We're still getting some of them right now, but we still have to go a long way. But we set up certain metrics and we started measuring them. The velocities we know now. So we know exactly how much we delivered for the last 1.5 years. And we actually use that to plan for next capacity, right? Relative estimation and all of those kind of techniques we put in place, and we continue to use them. So that is the second part of it. But right now, as our confidence levels are starting to increase, people are starting to trust our leaders yeah, you guys are good, you guys own your stuff, and we are comfortable, even though we have been around only a year, really. They've given us our leadership really put a lot of trust on us and said, yep, you guys are doing well. So we were able to quickly move into actually more of the mature metrics that I mentioned earlier. So we now talk about time to value. How long does an epic from idea to production does it take? And we look at it across all of our centers, right? Some centers are continuously improving. Some centers are staying flat. Some are actually going the wrong way. And that tells us what is going on. Could be for all the right reasons, Could be for wrong reasons, but bottom line is it gives us a good graph to allow us to focus to now go improve on that. Another one is the capacity. I talked about the percentage capacity spent on new product development or innovation work. So Uber, we look at it, we are very low, but our whole point of setting up multiple centers all over the globe was to improve the percentage of capacity from our whole of our R&D teams that goes into new product development. The intention being, if we focus that particular capacity on the right things for our customers, then our customers will get a lot more value. Again, is it directly a measurable thing? Probably not, but this is more about, hey, we don't need to get exact on some of these things, but we basically need to focus the teams on the right kind of things. The third thing, we also focused a lot about empowering teams, giving them a lot of autonomy, allowing the teams to make decisions. Even India team completely owns stuff, right? I mean, I am accountable for all of the consumer experience for global clients. I mean, we're talking, many of you probably are our clients, and I probably can't call that out directly, but at least some of you are my clients, and we all your consumers, whatever they are seeing is being delivered out of Bangalore, and the team only came into existence last year. So stuff like that. And then the last thing, of course, the biggest thing we need to do is for leaders looking upwards, right? In India, for example, and many of us are in India, or any other non-headquarter locations is what I'm talking about. You have to build trust. So you cannot, miss out on your say-do ratio, meaning commit well, right? Don't commit little and deliver. Commit well, but deliver. So that that predictability for your leader should be like, no matter what these teams of mine, whatever they say, they will do. If they are not committing enough, you will get more of a get out of jail card every single time. If you're actually able to deliver whatever you commit almost religiously, of course, right? You will never be 100%, but your percentage easily should vary somewhere above 85, closer to 90 or 95 when you look at a 1 year worth of work. So if you're doing that, a couple of days here and there is okay, right? But the bottom line is you should be as close to that date as possible. And if you're committing, that builds a lot of trust. And when the trust is building, the amount of autonomy you get changes. With autonomy, the teams get much more excited. They like that ownership and accountability, which automatically impacts their employee engagement and other things, which in a sense results in products that actually excite and delight our customers. So it's a vicious cycle, but so now at this point, we are looking at time to value, the capacity that we spend on new product development. Those are the types of metrics we are focusing on right now, in addition to the team-specific metrics.
You're on mute, Sangeeta.
Thanks, Srini. You touched upon a lot of very favorite topics of mine, like empowering the teams, autonomy, trust, etc. And once that is built, how it helps the company focus on much larger things, right? So thanks for that feedback. Srini, what do you do in Khoros? How is things done in Khoros?
Sure. So in Khoros, we use a set of measures, consistently across the various teams. That gives us an indication about how effective or efficient a team is. And considering that Khoros has multiple product lines, we also look at some metrics that gives us how effective the business unit is, so that we can tackle at that level as well. And it took us some time to come to these 4 areas that I will talk about, and that was something that I was pretty focused on in the initial days, because each team was operating at different cadences and different matrices, and it's very difficult for us to, take a sense of, okay, what does productivity mean in such a scenario, right? So it was important for us to, unify, what was being measured, and the sort of work that Khoros does is also pretty similar to what Srini B mentioned, right? I mean, we are responsible for at least 3 or 4 of the main product lines, and there is a lot of emphasis that's placed on accountability, ownership, and when you have those things, it's important to have matrices that help you determine whether you're living true to those, right? Mm-hmm. So the 4 things that we narrowed down over the course of the couple of years is, one, obviously the velocity of the team, right? That's a typical agile metric that you measure, so we continue to do that. The other one that we created at a business unit level is something called as delivery units. And what this effectively means is this is a combination of the size of the different items that are being planned for a particular quarter, and the number of items delivered of various sizes. So it's a formula that's built around both of those. And these items can be either technical debt items or it can also be functional items, right? Because a team at any given point of time has to have a healthy balance between both of them. So we use this metric, to kind of determine at every quarter what the team commits to and how effectively they ended that quarter. And when you kind of extrapolate it at the business unit level, it helps you understand how effective that entire unit has been, right? Because if that unit has got 5 or 6 Scrum teams, right? The delivery units taken at the business unit level tells you how effective all those teams have been in terms of delivering what they committed to, right? The third one that we use is typical, metric again, which is called as a roadmap completion, which effectively focuses just on the planned, roadmap items. And here it's essentially planned versus delivered, right? And our idea is to kind of make sure that we're pretty close to what was being planned. One thing that we did notice was during the course of any sprint, right? It's always very common for teams to have interruptions, right? These could be in terms of customer issues, these could be in terms of escalations that happen to drop on your plate. And one of the things that we then started focusing on, what is the mean time to respond and what is a mean time to resolve, right? And we started measuring this because it then gave us a good insight of how quickly the team is turning around to deal with an interruption and then get back to its roadmap delivery, or get back to bringing its velocity back on track, right? So we also started measuring those. And when we look at these 4 metrics that I just talked about, velocity, delivery units, roadmap completion, and mean time to respond and resolve, ideally you want to see an upward trend, right? In terms of velocity, in terms of delivery units, and in terms of roadmap completion, right? Because it kind of tells you that the team is improving over a period of time. But if you look at something like a mean time to respond or a mean time to resolve, you want to see this trend go downwards, right? Because you want to see how effective the team is in terms of responding and resolving issues. And here is where I feel there is opportunity for the team to innovate, right? Because if they find out ways to do things in an automated fashion, if they find out ways to do simple tools that can help them, arrive at a solution to a problem, this mean time to resolve / respond starts going down. And that also kind of brings in that level of innovation and kind of interest within the teams to kind of solve that problem fast, right? One thing that we consciously stayed away from, at least up till now, is we have not invested in any specific tool to measure productivity, right? Because if you look at it today, the tool set around productivity has improved phenomenally, right? And when you read, the typical features of tools like Plural Slide Flow, Git Clear, Pinpoint, and others, it looks very tempting to implement them, right? Because it kind of breaks it down by developer, it breaks it down by days, and so many things. But I feel if somebody decides to go down this path of implementing a tool without a proper strategy and why they need it, it will not yield the right results. And it will go back to one of the points that Deepak mentioned earlier, which is, you have to do it for the right things, right? So just don't do it because it's there. So I think the best approach that we have learned over a period of time is work with the team, determine a way forward. And I personally strongly believe in one of the Agile manifestos, which is individuals and interactions over processes and tools, right? Once that is no longer possible is when you start looking at tools and processes in terms of how you can improve things. But otherwise, talk to people and find out what's the best way to measure and what's the best way to move things forward.
This is getting really interesting, Srini, and a lot of depth and a lot of knowledge from both tools and process perspective. Thanks. Deepak, once again, you're going last, but definitely valuable insights. Over to you.
So, I won't touch on, specific, metrics per se, because I think, all of them covered very much. In terms of my experience, right, I run a platform organization that is distributed, close to about 500 people that report into me directly. Now, if I want to be really aware of what is actually happening in all corners of this, there is no way I can do that individually, right? There is no way I can have that pulse, and so you need some metrics, you need some processes in place to be able to really understand where you're going. And there is usually a breadth of things in terms of teams can, go from one extreme to the other extreme. And my philosophy in terms of being able to manage these kind of large, organizations, which I've done over the last 15 years, pretty much, is my philosophy is really to do a few things insanely well. So I don't believe in trying to put 20 different metrics and trying to improve all of them. My theory is that we will pick three and let's do very well on those three, and then we'll worry about, once we are good at that, let's actually go figure out what is the next thing, right? So where it actually matters is kind of what I try to focus on in being able to apply a particular metric. To me, when I'm accountable to deliver a platform that is used, and there are a lot of applications that get built on, and then worldwide customers are actually building on it. To me, the business aspect is as important as how well the team delivers things, right? So I look at it always. I look at in terms of productivity metrics from that lens. As far as I look at the ability to be able to ship effective software, according to requirements, on time, on budget. All of that is important for the business, right? So, what I try to do in trying to understand how I want to measure productivity, especially in the software development space, right, is to track both business as well as agile metrics. Now, things have started to change quite a bit in terms of, even when you say agile, we've started going into what we call a scaled agile. Now they're really self-managed, self-organized teams. So we start to depend a lot more on the internal understandings of the teams in terms of how responsible they are in measuring themselves to a large extent, and to hold each other's accountable. So we're looking to be able to tweak these metrics in terms of how do you get a sense in terms of what a great team looks like, and how can others learn from what that great team does look like. So I look at both business and application specific metrics that tells you how your consumers are using the product, and then whether that is meeting the market need or not, what have you. And then you have the agile metrics in terms of looking at the development processes, right? So by making that business, the success of the business perspective, is something that you've measured from a productivity perspective. You get a lot of insight into an external perspective for the teams, right? So I typically bucket productivity metrics into three categories. I look at it in terms of how do you optimize software delivery, which and a couple of colleagues really went into the depth in terms of how we measure that. I'm also looking at it in terms of software maintainability. It is not just good enough to write the code first time. I think Paul focused on it quite a bit in terms of how often do you go back, to that same code, or other ways of being able to keep up with the quality or what have you. And last in terms of the requirement effectiveness, or do you understand the use case correctly? Are you able to really plan in terms of to be able to address the requirements? Or you really delivering what the customer expected you to deliver, right? So those are kind of the three buckets that I typically look at productivity metrics.
Yeah, thank you, Deepak. Just a quick time check. We have a few more areas to cover, and we'll quickly go through it. But Deepak, we are not giving you a break. We're going to go right back to you and ask you one thing. Maybe all of you can touch upon in like a minute. What has really worked and what has not worked for you in your experience?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would probably say there is to understand that one size doesn't fit all. I think one of the panelists actually mentioned that before too. You can't take, just because I was there in the last company, I applied these metrics and it worked, doesn't mean it will work in a new place that I go to. I think that is one of the things really that comes to my mind. One of the things recently, that I had put in certain metrics to measure, especially more so in trying to figure out how well does the self-organized, self-managed teams work. What does productivity look like? The ones that really stood out had a few things in common, right? In terms of those teams, they actually had the right size. Typically, no more than 7 to 8 people, in that team. They actually had the right skill set, in the sense, they were the right people for the right job. You didn't actually, ask somebody, with a different, experience or stack to come and do a different type of work, right? They had the right skill set, and they also actually had right clarity of the roles that they are playing in the teams, right? Somebody, some new, he was a scrum master. What is his role, right? And the product owner, what is his role? But what was more important also was, we identified in terms of providing clarity on who is the, who is the quality champion and who is the security champion. One of our aims is to build the code, secure code right from the, get go. And so we said, the security champion is a must in everything. So it is their secondary hat, but they are the champions in terms of being able to drive the team and bringing the right knowledge into the team and being able to share. Those are some of the common things, right? People, holding each other accountable. They don't need a manager to hold them accountable. They actually try, hold each other accountable. That's what really, self-managed teams are all about, right? And lastly, they understood the best practices. That's what I, stood out as a common factor in all of this. I will just share one more thing, and pause there. One of the things I learned was the hardest part for the agile teams to be able to really learn, although it is the basic and fundamentals of agile methodology. If you look at it, is really how do I define goals and how do I break them into meaningful epics and how do I break them into story points. They struggle with it, and that needs upstream help in terms of they need to be really coached and trained as far as how do you look at an epic being a business outcome. How do you make sure that you deliver at the end of each sprint something that is demoable, something that is something that is shippable, and at the end, how do you adopt these epics? If you don't have an adoption, my theory is if you don't have an adoption, you're probably building something that's of no use, right? That nobody needs. So I always ask that question when I go and look at a project management tool and say, is somebody adopting it? If not, I would ask the question, why are we doing this, right? So let me pause there, with a little bit of my experience in and learnings.
No, Deepak, that was very insightful, and thanks for your perspective. Bal, over to you. What has worked and what has not worked in your experience with MindBody?
Yeah. So the way I look at these engineering metrics is in a way for me to prove or disprove some hypothesis, right? Now, when I'm talking to the team, looking at some of the problems faced, and then you come up with a hypothesis. You think that this is something I need to do, which will probably address this. But how do you? I mean, unless you have these measures in place and a way to really track it, it's very difficult to do that. But I think what allows me to do with all these engineering metrics in place is to prove or disprove hypothesis fairly quickly. I'll just give one example. As we were ramping up the teams and we are a new organization in India, one of the challenge was, how do we, what does it take to, make an engineer productive? And there are so many things there, right? Right from hiring. Are you hiring a right talent? I mean, what can you do differently to hire a right talent so that they can be productive? Then once they are onboarded, then what kind of training they are going, what kind of knowledge transfer activities they are going through, whom are you pairing them with, whether they have a buddies, whether they have mentors, all that, right? What we were trying to figure out is there one way which we can say that this is something which is the factor, right? And if we can improve that, whether that will improve. And one of the things which we had, one hypothesis which we had was on the reviews and comments when they start coding, right? The kind of review comments they get and the number of comments they get, whether it has any relation with how quickly they can become productive. And to trace this hypothesis, I think, some of the members mentioned that, tools probably come second and, the team first. I agree with that in principle, but I think for testing some of these hypotheses, you need some tools where you can then say that, let's try to look at across teams. How are the, which team members are getting review comments which are more verbose? You just measure how much is the number of words in those comments or how many comments they are getting. It's not, it's a little crude way, but it's still really very helpful. And what we will able to correlate is that the team members which are getting better comments, they come to productivity much faster because they understand, when they are making mistakes, why they are making mistakes, because the comments are clear on, what they did not do correct, what they should be doing, and so on, instead of just saying that, okay, this looks okay, please check in, kind of a thing. And that was very important. And that, I think, is a good learning. And also the fact that we could prove it with numbers that, this is the correlation which can establish. So let me pause here.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Srini, yes, I'm going to make it a little bit more challenging for you. I'm going to ask you what has worked and not worked, but if you can combine that with, how that affects the outcomes for a business organization, employees in general, like performance that, Bal commented about and Deepak talked about, building the right team, etc. If you can use that perspective and give us your view on that as well. So
Sure. So, if I look at those 4 matrices that I talked about, I think when we look at it in hindsight, I think those have given us the right level of visibility. Those have given us the right level of understanding of how efficient and how productive a team is, right? And over the course of many months, we have kind of kept tweaking these matrices in such a way that we see a constant improvement, across the different teams that have started adopting these. One other thing that I feel has really worked for us in terms of having this uniform adoption and having this uniform understanding is from the beginning, we kind of formulated a centralized program team, right? So this program team was essentially established to help guide all the different software teams on what needs to be done in terms of measuring these matrices in the right way and making sure that they get reported in a consistent way across all parts of the organization. So this, coupled with a right level of cadence with all the development heads on a regular basis, where we review the trends of these different matrices across the different teams, has helped us, really understand how, teams have been performing and where we need to do intervention, right? The other thing that we've also been very clear on with the teams is there is always a difference between predictability and productivity, right? And it's important for us to have that pretty clear, so that people don't kind of, intermix the two of them, right? Now, in terms of what has not worked, rather than using the word what has not worked, I will say what needs improvement, because this is like a continuum, right? You need to keep continuously improving things. So a couple of things that I think we have found over a period of time, one, we definitely want to make our sprint retrospectives a lot more actionable, right? Because that's the only time that teams get to reflect on what worked and what did not work. And many times these become a nice pat in the back type of meetings versus truly constructive, meetings where problems are put on the table and dealt with. So we want to make sure that we use that as a good avenue for understanding how we can, improve efficiency and productivity within the teams, right? The second one is continuing to focus on value. We are just in the beginning parts of our journey to adopt scaled agile. So since I did hear that from Deepak, probably I might reach out to him after this call to understand what was the journey that his team took. But that was something that we want to go deeper and try to understand, what we can do there in terms of driving better value creation. So Sangeeta, to answer the last question that you asked, which is, okay, how do all these things affect organizations in terms of business outcomes and employee morals? I think every organization has some measures, right? I think, Srini alluded to it in the beginning. And productivity metrics play, pretty much a very vital part in informing an organization on how efficient their teams are. And having a transparent view here will definitely help, the right amount of forecasting. But I firmly believe that, you should not run a business just by using metrics all the time, right? We also have to bring in a good amount of empathy and understanding of our workforce. And for this, I feel there is also a fair amount of investment that organizations need to make sure that the managers are equipped with the right skill set, right? From an employee standpoint, productivity has to be used very, very carefully. I think multiple times, the different panel members have talked about it. I don't think it's a mechanism to compare two people or two teams, but more specifically, it's all around how can management understand how effective and efficient their teams are and how can they improve teamwork, right? I always feel productivity should be viewed at a team level, right, rather than going down at an individual level, because that requires a high degree of transparency and high degree of understanding within the team members that this is not used for any other purpose apart from improvement, right? So as long as that is there, it does serve the right purpose. And it is also important that once we have an understanding of these productivity numbers, managers again play an important part in understanding who are those people who might be dragging productivity down, and thereby what interventions are required to help improve the state of affairs. One thing I would kind of end my talk with is especially during this COVID time, I think everybody has had some level of personal stress in their work from home environments, and I generally feel productivity during this time has got a lot of different connotations, right? And I think one thing that we all have to be mindful of is be very, very careful in terms of how you bring up productivity-based conversations, because if it's not messaged well, it can have a very, very adverse impact on the morale of a team member. So work with the managers, focus on outcomes, and then make sure that there is continuous conversations and collaboration within the team to really get a view of what's going well, what's not going well, and try to address that.
Yep. Bal, any 30-second closing comments from you on this?
Sure. Yeah. So I agree with Srini. I think what's important is that all these metrics, you should look at it more as a guidance, more from a perspective that, a general trend of how the team is doing. Don't try to use it as a measure for obviously performance improvement. Or basically punishing somebody for doing something not that great. Because the moment you start doing that, I think people will start to work towards succeeding the metrics than the succeeding the business value. So they will probably start doing that. So my suggestion is, I think look at it at a holistic level, and also look at what's happening on the ground. So the engineering metrics should be combined with, what's the team engagement level, how is the morale, are you seeing too much attrition in the team, because those are also actual indicators from a quality perspective on how the team dynamics is. So I would say that just look at it as a guiding factor. Don't sweat yourself with your velocity moving from 80% to 78%. I don't think it matters in long run, as long as the business value is delivered and team is effective.
Thank you, Bal. I'm going to deviate from the script a bit. So Deepak, your closing comments.
Great. I couldn't agree more with what Srini and Bal talked about. Just to close, what I would say is, if you want to choose optimal software metrics, for your project, for your group, for your product, whatever I kind of rely on three principles. Right? You can effectively measure, a certain area of an application or a development process. So identify what it is that you want to really measure. Understand that there is a relationship that exists between what can be measured and what you want to learn out of it. Going back to what we talked about, and then what just Paul referred to as well. And then lastly, the relationship, that relationship that you understand, can be validated and expressed in terms of, in some quantitative form, right? A formula, a model, whatever that is, to be able to, quantify it. I would just use those three principles, from that perspective.
Thank you, Deepak. Srini, we started with you, so we want some closing comments from you, and that'll help us close out. So over to you.
Very hard to follow up on those. Very, very good summary from all the panel members. So I think at the end of the day, like trying to tie it back, right? There are different ways to look at, what's important depending on who you're talking in an organization, execs versus mid-level management to leaders, and of course teams and people. Being able to identify those right goals and setting the right metrics, the critical few that everybody talked about, And those are the things that will make everybody successful. And if they're not working, it's okay, right? In 3 months, you can tweak your metrics. You can change or go to a different metric. So that is one thing. I mean, we try to get the right metric, and we spend too much time on trying to define the right metric upfront. We lose the momentum. That's one. And the second one is try to automate the gathering the metrics. Do not make it a manual chore. One of the things is, even if the metric is not perfect and it is consistently wrong or off, it is still a valid indicator of where things are going, versus we try to capture data manually, lots of errors and all of that. And most of the time people will be debating, oh, that data is not right. And then all the conversation, instead of focusing on the metric, what it is telling us, it'll be focused on why is the data wrong. And that's just inefficient in the grand scheme of things. So I'll pause there. Fantastic conversation. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Very varied insights and a lot of useful information. We have one audience question panel. If you're open to staying back and taking that one question, is that okay? And it's a pretty interesting question as well.
I will not take this question because I know the gentleman who asked it. So I'd love to listen to one of the other panel members respond.
Sure. So we talk about tying productivity to the value delivered to our customers. So that comes from a lot of the team members who actually go into contributing that valuable thing that we deliver to our customers. But what about the roles played by other team members, and how do we help them measure the productivity in their work? Like, for example, design related communication, client communication related work. So sometimes even the scrum masters, right? So how do you measure productivity for them, and how do you show that whatever they are doing is also valuable to the customers?
It is actually incredibly important for me to make sure that they are actually working as a team. Again, I go back to not using productivity metrics for measuring individual performance. We're actually looking at team performance. We're actually looking at team productivity, right? And to me, if the team together is not delivering something, then it is not actually up to the mark, and then we have to go back and have that conversation. The ability to be able to develop something that is concrete, that is demoable, that is shippable at the end of a sprint. Ability to be able to have that adopted either internally or externally, someone who is going to use it. It could actually, you may be developing an infrastructure piece that somebody else is using internally to be able to deliver customer value. That is okay, but you have to have that internally adopted for that matter. Right, and so it is important to be able to keep that in mind. And if there is nobody internal or external who is trying to leverage what you're doing in real time as you're developing, the whole idea of using an agile methodology, you might as well release it 6 months later and hope somebody buys it, right? So that's the downside of it. So I think so it is important. It doesn't matter in terms of whether you are the person writing the 2 lines of code, or whether you are a designer who designs a screen that uses those 2 lines, or a scrum master or a product owner who defines the requirements, or who actually helps the team, keep the team going and keep it on track, right? All actually have contribution to make that team successful.
Thank you, Deepak. Very well said. In closing comments, I really don't have to say anything more because whatever the panel shared was so insightful and so valuable. And I think we can take this conversation to LinkedIn and there were many more questions, so we can post that there. And panelists, if you're open to answering them there, that'll be great. So in summary, great conversation. Thank you, Deepak. Thank you, Srini B. Thank you, Srini S. And thank you, Bal, for all the very insightful information. And this is a very vast topic, and I can see already that 1 hour is not enough to cover this, but thank you so much for trying to put in your thoughts in the given time. So thank you so much.